I hope you can hear me loud and clear. If you feel like you can't, there's always the question area where you can feel free to provide any live questions that you have. Of course, this session is being recorded. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Today, I'm going to talk to you about migrating, more or less upgrading your MySQL 5.7 Galera cluster instances to MySQL 8. And the full aim of this is, of course, to ensure you do all of this with no downtime, because nobody likes downtime, right? I can always be reached via email, so feel free to also take that as a little note. So general agenda is, why are you going to even bother with Galera cluster with MySQL 8 and Galera 4? What's new in MySQL 8? Just some highlights. Planning the migration, testing it, doing it all with no downtime, because that is truly the goal here. And we can also help you. That's the added bonus. So what is really new in Galera 4? So to be very clear, Galera 4 now has been out for more than 3 years. And Galera 4 with MySQL 8 has also been around for a little over 3 years. So for anyone still running 5.7 or 5.6 or 5.5, it probably is time to upgrade, because the core Galera library itself has received multiple updates. So we can start with one, streaming replication. So if you are using Galera 3, which is what is standard in MySQL 5.7 and before, you will realize that Galera does not really process long-running transactions the way you'd expect it to. If you have noticed, Galera usually would recommend you to have no larger than a gigabyte per transaction, or if you try to do a large load data in file, you will find that it basically would stop working. So we fixed this by introducing something called streaming replication that allows you to chunk row data. So typically you can stream 10 to 20,000 rows across the network, and this will actually more or less speed up replication, and you can do large load data in files of hundreds of gigabytes even if you like. We also have a couple of new metadata tables in the MySQL database. This is the WSREP cluster members, and the last one's for streaming replication. You will notice that some of this data is actually kept in the GRA state.dat file or the GVW state.dat file, but this is exposed now within the server. There are also a couple of interesting new WSREP functions. And in those WSREP functions, we have what you can return to the application to wait for the last seen global transaction ID, the last written global transaction ID, or sync wait up to the global transaction ID. So these are also, I'd say, fairly useful. We also have the certification rules now optimized to handle foreign keys, which it turns out is quite important. And then naturally beyond that, we also have resilience in handling poor network connections, and we have a cluster error voting protocol. So if you're running your Galera cluster in the cloud, it turns out that you may have a poor network connection, or if a zone may go away, etc. It turns out this is actually a relatively useful feature for you, so that Galera itself handles it, and handles it gracefully without you having to do much of anything. Group commit is natively integrated into the MySQL 8 binary log code base. This is important so that you're getting more efficient group commits. The GTID compatibility is also fully basically with MySQL 8. So Galera used to have its own global transaction IDs. Now it follows the MySQL 8. I think a very interesting feature, maybe underrated, is the feature called clone SST that is actually faster than your extra backup solution, extra backup v2. When it comes to do an SST, it uses the clone plugin to make this happen. And of course, if you also have the Enterprise Edition, we have this non-blocking operations for online schema change. We can also do full-on encryption. MySQL 8 brings on the ability for you to do encryption of your data directory, but the Enterprise version gives you the Gcache encryption. There's also a black box to store debug messages in the main memory ring buffer. And there's also actually XA support inside of Galera for MySQL 8 Enterprise. So a lot of new features, 3 years of stability, very hard for you not to want to upgrade. MySQL 8 itself has been around for maybe in excess of 5 years now. And I'm not going to highlight each and every change, but I think the most important changes are the ones that we should highlight. For example, you may think that after an upgrade, you should run MySQL upgrade. But now the server itself handles the task of MySQL upgrade since 8.0.16, and MySQL upgrade is itself deprecated. So SSL as well for the session, these connections can get reused, and in the cloud, you probably want to turn on SSL. All your round tables are now stored inside of InnoDB as opposed to MyISAM, so they're actually transactionally safe. Important for you for a migration is that there is no longer MySQL native password. In fact, you'll notice it's deprecated in 8.0.34. It's because there is a new password algorithm called caching SHA-2 password. There's also, of course, I mentioned data at rest encryption, common table expressions, window functions, resource groups, which is like C groups, but within the database. And there's also the ability to authenticate via multi-factor authentication option. So, external authentication besides just username and password. Deprecated, important for the Galera folk, of course, is the binlog format. You don't need to put binlog format equals row any longer because binlog format as an option is deprecated because no longer will there be statement or mixed mode replication going forward. And UTF-8 MB3 is no longer supported, but UTF-8 MB4 is from a collation standpoint. Also, you'll notice that the password function is removed, procedure analyze is removed, and the likes of the query cache is gone. But query cache doesn't matter for Galera users because you shouldn't be using the query cache anyway. So I would say that you must read the release notes for each and every minor release because there is actually a new release model. So yeah, I'd say definitely consider reading release notes thoroughly. There's obviously a lot more changes. The data dictionary has changed. You can't use partitioning unless you're using InnoDB, but you should really only use InnoDB if you're using Galera. Character sets have switched from Latin 1 to UTF-8 MB4. The collation from Latin 1 Swedish CI to UTF-8 MB4 as well. Something that may trip up your application is explicit defaults for timestamp is now set on by default. Max allowed packet is 64 megabytes by default. Good for Galera is InnoDB auto increment lock mode is now interleaved by default. Binary logging is on by default, as is log slaving updates on by default. And even though Galera doesn't require the use of the binary log, we do recommend you keep a small binary log in case you need to do point-in-time recovery. Of course, we also notice 8.0 is more CPU intensive than 5.7, and its single core performance may be poorer compared to 5.7, but its multi-core performance should be more or less good enough. How would you upgrade? Well, I would make a backup of MySQL in your data directory. So MySQL dump for a good logical backup, go on extra backup for a good physical backup, and ensure your backup restores. And you can also run this thing called MySQL check all databases to check the upgrade. So I'd say that's also pretty useful. So before we jump on over to upgrading Galera cluster, let's actually go forth and install some MySQL. So I of course have a bit of a run book because naturally we want to do this more or less fast. So I'm going to SSH into some machines that I've set up. They have no MySQL setup, and I'm going to install Galera 5.7 first. So this is all pretty standard, just pulling releases Galera cluster, Galera 3, CentOS 7, etc. I'm going to set SELinux to off because why would we want that to be around today? In production, of course, you could leave it on. This is just to make this demo work fast. So we're going to set up 5.7, we're going to load some data, and then we're going to upgrade it to 8.0 with no downtime. So here we have some installation going on. In fact, I can do the same for everything. Oops. Okay. So set enforce 0. All right, so then we're going to add a my.cnf. You'll notice that I have a very, very simple my.cnf just to get us going. So naturally, I'm going to have binlog format row. Storage engine, of course, should be in a DB. Auto increment lock mode. So all of this stuff, right, you actually don't even need in the new version of MySQL. And then where the WSREP provider is actually kept, and some 3 nodes here. And I'm going to start the first node here. And then I'm going to grep for the temporary password log MySQL. So we have a nice little temporary password here. Then we're going to do a quick alter. Then we're going to check to make sure that all worked. Voila, show status like WSREP cluster size. Okay, so here we can do the same. Remember, you should only start 1 server at any given time, not 2. The reason being very simple. You only have the ability to have 1 node to be a donor, and so that means that only 1 can be a joiner at that point in time in a 3-node cluster. And then let's just go here, create database demo, use demo. And let's just enter some data, right? Why not? It doesn't hurt for us to do some data entry to also show that replication, happens. So MySQL-p, feel I pop the password. $30,000. So we're now on 2 different servers. So 2 in the cluster, as promised. And we're at 50,000 there. Here we can go again, edit the my.cnf. So we will make now a 3-node Galera cluster. And so I'm still doing, inserts. It's growing. All right. So we have a 3-node cluster. In fact, if I use the demo, voila. So we have a 3-node Galera cluster, all running MySQL 5.7.4.2. So I made a very quick demo of starting up a 3-node Galera cluster. Now, there are several ways to do a Galera upgrade. There is the rolling upgrade, which is the upgrade we're going to actually focus on because that's the one that gives you uptime. And in this upgrade, you basically have one node at a time without taking down the whole cluster, and the newly upgraded nodes can join the cluster. And you can do a bulk upgrade where you have to take down the cluster for maintenance and upgrade all the nodes together. This is the non-online version, and you may use this because you potentially only have 2-node Galera cluster. And then there's the provider upgrade, because sometimes you just don't want to upgrade the server, but you just want to upgrade the WS rep provider. And that's also something that is supported. But we don't recommend you just doing only a provider upgrade. So it's between a rolling or a bulk. If you have a 3-node Galera cluster at a minimum, we highly recommend you just focus on the rolling and do everything online. Why wait for doing stuff in an offline fashion? So few things first. Always we should aim for an incremental state transfer rather than a fully state snapshot transfer. As long as the node can catch up, this is exactly what you're aiming for. So this is what we would recommend you to use naturally. If you're using SSD, of course, extra backup v2 or rsync or clone SSD work very good. We prefer you not to use MySQL dump because we feel like MySQL dump is naturally most locking and of course would be considered to be the slowest. Note that you're taking down node by node in a cluster. So you will have, of course, diminished capacity during your busy times. And your performance is, of course, reduced when the node comes back up because you need to warm up the buffer pool. It turns out if you don't do that, it wouldn't be good for you, right? Because that's how queries can be given to you faster. So slow queries, not good. So this is more or less how you do it. But then when I say you're doing everything online, how are you going to get your application not to read or write from an upgraded database? So before we get to that, I recommend all of you to calculate your Gcache size in production. So let's receive bytes and replicated bytes, sleep for a minute, do it again, and then do a bit of a calculation to see how long you can go offline. The reason why I ask you to see how long you can go offline is if you have a valid MySQL of like 200 megabytes, this is an easy transfer for IST or SSD. But if you have a valid MySQL of 200 gigabytes, this becomes a bit longer because it's a network transfer. If you're going to do an SSD, that's why we prefer an IST. But what happens if you have 2 terabytes of data? This is even longer over the network. So you definitely want to do an IST, not an SSD. So you've got to make sure the Gcache size is large enough before you actually do such an execution. So this is why right sizing your Gcache is very important. You will notice that I didn't set any Gcache size, nor am I showing you how to do a calculation. I'm just giving you slides on it. The process is very simple. You should drain client connections from the node that you're upgrading, but you have to also ensure that no new connections come to said node. In MySQL 5.7 and greater, you have 5.7.5 and greater, you have this option called offline mode. Offline mode will enable you to actually just drain connections. But if you happen to also use a proxy, you will realize that the proxies usually have the ability to do exactly the same. And we will talk about that basically now, I guess. It's very simple to configure. Galera load balancer, highly performant, and it's TCP based. It supports draining connections from a server, and of course, it requires you to compile, or you can use it as part of Galera Cluster Enterprise, or you can use SQL-based layer 7 proxy like Proxy SQL, which has Galera Cluster host support. I don't know if any of you are using a proxy, but a proxy is the best way to actually direct where the traffic is going during an upgrade process. So why don't we go forth and do an upgrade? So you've already seen that we have three nodes set up. How do we go forth and do an upgrade? Let's first and foremost stop MySQLD on one node. In fact, I put it here in the runbook. So I'm going to stop and show, oops. It's now down to 2. So add stuff. So I've stopped it. Now I'm going to edit the yum repository. And I'm going to update it with Galera 4. Then I'm going to remove, but first before removing it, I'm going to make sure I have the data directory. It's 255 megabytes. And it's got a lot of files, naturally, including the demo database. Now I'm going to remove MySQL, but remember, it doesn't remove the data directory. And we can obviously verify it's still 255 megabytes. So that's a good thing. Then I'm just going to install Galera 4 and MySQL 8, all while I still have 2 nodes and still being able to process transactions. And oh yeah, 200,000. So transactions are still going on as per normal. And again, this is a node by node operation. Now we need to, of course, log on to our my.cnf. Oops, lazy. You'll see that it's completely empty, as you'd expect. I should probably just change that real quick. Oh. So it's very important that we do all the copying, pasting, configuration accurately, because Galera and MySQL are non-forgiving. So now, literally, all I need to do is start MySQLD. And you will actually notice that soon this will grow to 3. And if I do, we actually have 3, select version, still 5742. 8033. Voila, node 1 is now updated. So you can actually see we have shifting primary to joiner, Gcache history reset, and then we actually did an SST in this case. And you will know why, is because I didn't specify an SST option, so naturally it's going to pick the async SST option. So that's node 1 updated. Now let's do node 2. At this point in time, you should only be writing to node 1 and reading from node 1 or 3 when I stopped the node 2. Okay. I'm now fairly confident, so I'm obviously not doing any checking of var libmysql. We also know that there is one updated version of var libmysql here. So as you can see, 8033 right there. Okay, so that's another one that's been started. So again, I'm going to just go on and edit the my.cnf because the data directory doesn't get removed when you remove the package. Pop this here. Take second IP. So we already can see that we are on 8033. $300,000. So obviously now we know we have two nodes that have been upgraded. So now we tell the load balancer to actually direct traffic to read write from nodes 2 and 3. And we take node 1 down, we drain node 1 and put that into maintenance mode. Then we do exactly the same thing. Make sure we copy it correctly. And then remove Galera 3. Bring on Galera 4. And then I'll edit the my.cnf. At this point in time, as you probably already know, I can just add whatever I want to, let's say, this server. Two, three, four, five. All right, so we did that. I have installed it. Now, naturally, I should also make sure I have a my.cnf. And I can go on and on and on. We have 3 nodes here. And we are now fully upgraded to 8033 across all nodes. There is not one single node that is not 8033. Of course, if I use the demo server, it's all matching everywhere because I mean that's what Galera does, right? It's meant to have the same copy of the same data across all nodes. So I've shown you the ability to go from 5.7 to 8.0 without much ado. I think that should be reasonably exciting. So the upgrade process, if you have 2 nodes and are using Galera Arbitrator Daemon, I recommend you to then do a bulk upgrade. You cannot do an online upgrade, mostly because you don't have the ability to have a proper donor node when there is a new joiner. Because the arbitrator daemon just keeps traffic, it doesn't actually keep data. You write to an 8.0 node before it is the majority, then is in 2 out of 3. This is not recommended because it'll actually kick out the 5.7 node. So keep traffic only on the 5.7 node first. So the general idea is take down node 3, upgrade it, bring it up, take down node 2, upgrade it, bring it up, divert your read-write traffic to the 2 new 8.0 nodes, take down node 1, upgrade it, bring it back up. Now you will benefit from IST from all of them. This is actually a pretty simple process. You've seen it, but of course, I told you the time it takes to run MySQL upgrade on a data set that is larger is of course going to be longer. So that's why the Gcache size is also very important to remember. What we didn't cover today, of course, because we didn't advertise it, is MariaDB server upgrades, the ConeXDB cluster upgrades. So MariaDB server still requires you to run MariaDB upgrade. For ConeXDB cluster, for example, still has things like strict mode and SSL encryption out of the box by default. So there are a little bit more considerations when it comes to upgrading. Cluster control can do this via a graphical user interface, as can Galera Manager in the near future. And we didn't cover upgrading MySQL 5.5 to 8.0. So if you're migrating from, say, MariaDB 10.3 to MariaDB 10.11, this is actually a possible upgrade. But if you're going from 5.5 to 8.0, we'd recommend going from 5.5 to 5.6 to 5.7 to 8.0. So this is important to remember because 5.5 is still actually being run in production, and this 5.5 is very old. It was released in what 2009 or 10, so it's completely out of support. So of course we can help you in multiple ways. We have a migration training coming up where you will do lots of hands-on labs. So similar to what we did today in the demos, but you're going to actually get to do them across everything, be it, and also MariaDB and Percona. We have also got migration consulting practice, which starts with a day of time with an expert consultant. So these are options for you as well. Remember that when you migrate from 5.7 to 8.0, your passwords are going to change. Remember that downgrades do not work. So minor release upgrades are one way, they don't go back. So you should always test your upgrade anyway. And make sure you check and double check your my.cnf, because you make a mistake, you're going to find that Galera doesn't actually want to start. And that can be obviously problematic. So if you have any questions, I'm actually open to answering them. You put them in the question box. And if you don't, you can always send email. So there, obviously, these slides will be available for you as well, recording as well. So I recommend you think about upgrading. You have actually got not much choice because MySQL 5.7 is going to EOL in October of 2023. That's this year, a few months more. So I'd start getting planned on this upgrade slash migration to MySQL 8 ASAP. Uh, so with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening, and feel free to send email if you have questions.